Okay, then, so thank you for coming and make this brief. So our next speaker today is Poon, towards a physics of that, distributive self-assembling biology. Please go ahead.
So thank you for the opportunity to give you a second talk. The first talk I gave was on things I've been working on for a year. This is on something I've been thinking about for 5 years, but only started doing something on it in the last few weeks and months. So I overheard Tanny saying to someone about me, talking to Wilson is always interesting and not always useful. Well, this is Friday. I don't aim to be useful. I don't have to this interesting for you. And maybe this will give you something to think about next time when you think you're bored of what you're doing, you want something new to do. Right. So I've called this towards physics of data, participating biology. That's because I want to get you here. A better title would have been to swap them around, dissipative self-assembling towards the physics of death. So this is a slide. Right. So in this community, especially since many of us come from soft matter, we know that. I wonder whether any of you know where the phrase self-assembly came from. You know who first used it. Who had used Google Android? If you haven't, and now you know about it, don't log on unless you want to waste 3 hours. Actually, I didn't do any work after I learned about this for free. Because you can type in any phrase, soft matter. The fraction of all the digitized books in English in America that has ever used the phrase. Okay, so if you type in soft matter, that's the curve you get. I mean, you do actually normalize it. If you type in the word the, it should be constant, right? And you can see where the noise starts. Around 1600, it breaks up, and around 2000, it breaks up because the digitization is not, uniform. I always check with the student, they're good by asking them to use this. If they normalize it with the, they're good. If they don't, they're not good. Anyway, but this is sort of period 1900, 2000, when data is, the is constant. Okay. I mean, you go to the old data, tell you that years when English book did not use the word the. Here, they had no books in there. Right. Right. Anyway, so I wonder whether you know what happened there and there. And that's a great year to be born in. By the way, I'm solely responsible. So, hey, I never thought of that, but that's wonderful. Anyway, in 1962, this paper was published by Donna Casper and Aaron Klug, and Aaron Klug taught me physics down the road in Peterhouse for a few years. Won a Nobel Prize. Klug got the Nobel Prize for solving the atomic structure of the tuberculosis virus. He invented a new way of doing microscopy and analyzing the data. So this is Casper, and because he won the Nobel Prize, the Swedes made a stamp of Klug. His head is a little too big. Never mind. Physical principle in the construction of regular viruses, even if you don't know the paper, you will know what he says. A symposium that these programs can organize. It's going to be all about that. It came from there. And in that paper, they talk about this process. So this is a simulation, but you know what happens. This is a strand of nucleic acid. Those are the capsids. But what they said was, the way a virus is put together or puts itself together is not like assembling factory furniture. It was before IKEA. But anyway, he says actually still after IKEA is to say, but it says in the case of viral capsids, the instructions for assembling are built into the components themselves, unlike factory-made things. I'm not going to speed this up, but you know what's going to happen. That happens. Okay, so if you haven't seen it, this is amusing. Right. So here's some viral capsid proteins, simulated Brownian motion. It's made with little magnets inside. It's very cute. I wanted to order one, but by the time I saw the video, it long sold out. It's made by a bunch of students in MIT. You've got one?
Yeah, we have fabricated that ourselves.
Oh, you made it yourself? Okay.
So
I was.
but if you have
Can you
two of them,
this?
if you have two of them, it's not so easy to make them assemble to two. You get all kinds
That's
of.
already telling you. That's telling you something, and we'll have something to say about what I have to say later. Actually, that's a very good example of what I would say later. Right. Now, if you type it into Web of Science, what it will tell you is that the phrase self-assembly stayed within the viral biophysics community until the 80s. There are two things on my graph, 62 and about 85. What happens 85 is this. This is my Edinburgh colleague, Peter Pusey, just before he came to Edinburgh, when he worked with Bill Van Meegen, and he's very proud that this picture has appeared in Nature twice. He published it, and very much later, someone wrote a commentary on the paper and asked him for permission to publish it again. He's very, very proud that his picture has appeared in Nature twice. He showed that hard spheres can self-assemble just around in motion, and the simplest possible thing, colloidal hard spheres can self-assemble into crystals. And indeed, self-assembly of viruses is a little bit like crystallization. So this is the first example, simplest possible self-assembly of synthetic soft matter. And we all know what happens, the rest is history. The moment soft matter physicists discover and soft matter chemists discover the concept of self-assembly, boom, I mean, we've all been involved in that boom, and it's still going. Okay, so that's the context in which I'm thinking about this. So, of course, when soft matter physicists first started doing a self-assembly, the chemists got very angry. Because we've been self-assembling for 2,000 years. What are you guys doing? There's something I'm saying, we've just discovered self-assembly. A lot of things worked on about self-assembly were known before, but seeing the whole field under a new light, as we all know, led to new advances. Because we systematize it, because we bring the whole statistical mechanical thinking to it, right? So it's not as if a lot of things were not known before, but seeing things under a new perspective matters. And what I'm going to say about self-assembly is that almost nothing that I tell you is not known to someone already. But what I'm suggesting is that there is a coherent way you can bring them all together, and we are the right sort of people to do it. And that may well lead to another boom, like when physicists discover biophysicists. Okay, so that's basically my storyline. Okay, so I mean, there was a whole bunch of millennial essays published by science. One of them was by White Science, and I'll pronounce this guy's name. Can you say that slowly? Right, fine, but it's White Science. Right, so he's not even a bot. Right. White Science and Grabowski is approximately right. Low 2-1. Right. They wrote a science millennial essay on. Said, now self-assembly is a big thing since the 80s. And so what they said, self-assembly the components equilibrate between aggregated and non-aggregated states, or in other words, the self-assembly that they're talking about is near equilibrium. Okay, the crucial word is the equilibrate word. In other words, we are talking, broadly speaking, about reactions of the kind that M lots of A monomers and N lots of B monomers. Quasi-equilibrium conditions into a structure that you want, which is AMBN. Okay. And what that requires is that the relevant equilibrium constant, oh, it's complicated because the thing has got units and all the rest of it, but never mind. Basically, the reaction has to be biased all the way. It should be AMBN without that bracket here. This concentration of this lot. These brackets should be gone. Right. Okay, so that equilibrium constant has to be large. In particular, it has to be large compared to the equilibrium constants, suitably non-dimensionalized with molar volumes and stuff, but has to be larger than the constants, the equilibrium constants, for making all the other ones. Because when M and N are large, they're combinatorially large other kinds that you don't want. And the trick is to find a system that you design such that the equilibrium constant reaction that you want is very much larger under equilibrium conditions and all the other combinatorially large number of structures that you don't want. So here is an example. Okay, so in other words, what we're looking for is the suitable kinetics to funnel you down into the global free energy minimum, right? So the review written in 2017 by Sarah Schick and Vinny Manoharan and Michael Brenner on how you can do that with mesoscopic components. In this case, DNA-coated colloids, where you can. Because the whole thing is under quasi-equilibrium conditions. The bonds can make and break under equilibrium conditions, and their inspiration is biological. They said these are the highlighted bit is about there are 5 characteristics of living organisms, and the first one is to spontaneously assemble complex structures. But they quoted from one of their own papers where they call this Big Bang self-assembly. It's very cute. They want us to assemble Big Bang. This is not my terminology, it's their terminology. Light bright, it's no clock. Yeah. That comes later. But what they show here is that here's a parameter that they tune. They have some kind of interaction matrix between all the neighbors, and epsilon is either how, minus epsilon is how the ones they want to attract each other, and plus epsilon is the one that they don't want to attract each other, will repair each other with plus epsilon. When they tune the parameter, these are the yields of 4 different structures, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the one that they want is the orange one. And so, you know, obviously you want this condition, but even under those conditions, the bendy one, you know, this is kind of, for those of you who have been around Cambridge, go to Queen's College, the mathematical bridge, supposedly built by Newton. This is the mathematical bridge. This is just a Fishbin's Chasuble. So that's Big Bang. And so, you know, you have to tune these things, and they spend years doing this. It was hard work. So in other words, if you design something using equilibrium physics, it's hard work. It's serious hard work.
And these colors are somehow indicative of this strength.
I will leave you to read the paper. It's a complicated thing.
Okay.
It has meaning. It's not just the prettiness, but I can give you a talk on that, but I wouldn't. But it's well explained in the review paper, but that's a good review to read.
Okay.
So the end, towards the end of the paper, there's a section called Beyond Equilibrium. Because you want to make it less hard work, you don't have to spend years and years designing the free energy funnels. You can actually go beyond equilibrium. For instance, one can, I don't know why the word brings wrong, one can allow some of the bonds to be irreversible. How do you allow a bond to be reversible?
You just, that's what I wanted to tell you. You're just changing the equilibrium constant, isn't it? That will.
What you could, but what I say, what I'm saying, suppose you don't do that because that relies on equilibrium physics. Because you didn't want, if life has not done that, if the biosphere has tried to evolve like that, I think still before bacteria, turns out that life did not do that. Life did not just tune equilibrium constants. That's the point. Yes, you could do that, but then you end up doing this hard work. Correct. Because I want to do it in finite time. then what do you do? So one way, of course, is to do dissociative assembly to fuse. No, I know my so basically, this is what you do. You actually make that essentially non-equilibrium, essentially permanent bonds by driving the reaction one way, you can't go back. And the way you do it, I'm very proud, I know how to draw that in latex. I don't know if you know how to draw that in latex.
I know what to do.
Yes.
Very good. Very good. I'm impressed. You write your own code, use a package.
I asked other people to.
No. There's a very good package called ChemFig, by the way.
Yes.
It's fantastic. I have one ChemFig mystery that I want to consult you about.
Okay.
I want to draw both ways, with one at the bottom, the other way. I couldn't draw it last night. Anyway, I was just drawing it myself, and then I said, no, someone must have done this before. Right, so that's how you make it effectively permanent, by driving it. And that, of course, is non-equilibrium. So the point is, when you go from fuel to spent fuel, this process dissipates chemical free energy, or dissipates free energy. It's non-equilibrium. So the advantages of it is, for example, you can choose. You have a much bigger choice of reaction. So, for example, even when this reaction actually has a positive delta G, you can still couple the other one in to make it go, for instance, or you can also make it selective. If you're clever enough, then you can drive particular reactions and leave other ones less driven. You know, so but the universal possibility opens up. And of course, it allows you to exert control because you can choose to drive particular reactions. And of course, the control thing directly links to almost the name of the subtitle of this program. I mean, we have the word adaptive in it, but you know, using non-equilibrium to control things. That's how biology does it. So, whenever I give this talk, you're talking about actin self-assembly, because we all know when you self-assemble G-actin, the F-actin, it has to G. What's wrong with that? I don't mean it's just not complicated enough. I know there are thousands of steps, but conceptually, what's wrong with that? I mean, that was my understanding of it until recently.
What you had with GTP, externally stays GTP or ATP, sorry, has to make the binding authority later.
I think you're probably saying this, but you may or may not be. But the point is this: the active picture is this. Okay, so the G-actin gets activated by ATP insofar as it binds to ATP. I don't think it actually looks like that as Scotch-active ATP inside, but never mind. Then it forms some stable dimers and trimers. Then these self-assemble into filaments. And then it turns out that when it's in the F-actin form, the ability for this thing to hydrolyze the ATP to steps that actually makes it non-equilibrium and dissipative is I think 40,000-fold higher than in that form. So the ATP gets hydrolyzed there. So in other words, the bit that is actually dissipative is not the self-assembly. The bit that is actually dissipative is the disassembly. All of these take place near quasi-equilibrium conditions. The bit that is actually doing the trick is not self-assembly, but self-disassembly. So this is dissipative self-disassembly, is a self-disassembly, and it's dissipated because ATP gets hydrolyzed in that step. Up to that step is quasi-irreversible. That's the step that makes it irreversible. And as far as I know, no one has actually answered the question, why does it do that? What's wrong with doing it the other way?
But isn't there another aspect to it, and that is that you separate the assembly, strictly separate assembly from disassembly, because if you didn't have the polarity of the active filament, you would still end up in something that.
So I mean, this is a genuine question. Suppose you do that in an alternative world where you do the hydrolysis step in the assembly at the front, what would be different, or is it entirely symmetrical?
My remark was rather that you have to have two different ends.
Yes,
one way you add and the other one take away. Because otherwise it would still be.
No, I agree, but you can distinguish that by tuning the front with tuning the assembly with a dissipative step and not the disassembly with the dissipative step. I don't know whether this is entirely an accident of evolution that is that way round, or whether there's a deeper reason. I suspect, given all the other things I'm going to say, I think there is a deeper reason. I don't know the answer to that. And this is the right kind of people, right kind of group of people to begin to ask that question and answer it.
Yeah.
It got so used to it that we haven't asked the question.
Because if I take into account what you said in the previous slide, because the first step isn't dissipative, it should be much harder than it needs to be.
That may well be the case, and I mean we can discuss it after. I mean, from now on, every slide is going to raise a question. So while I'd be fascinated to discuss each slide in detail with you, I just want to show you that there are lots of possibilities of asking these interesting questions. A lot of it is sort of Sherlock Holmes, just Holmes asks the questions and Watson thinks it's obvious. I don't think it is obvious. That's all.
But there is this case where you dissipate energy when you assemble, and that's when you assemble proteins, right?
There's the next slide. Yes. Yes. But in fact, no. In fact, it turns out, no. Not quite. This thing is being driven. You're ATP and I'm the other bit. That's excellent. I don't mean to label you as a dissipating person. Right, protein translation and arrivals. Okay, so this is the transfer RNA. There are unbelievably interesting things that happens to it, binds to this thing, but this is the GTP bit, right? So what am I going to say next? Okay, so GTP is the fuel. This is not ATP, it's GTP. It's the same kind of thing. So this is the fuel, and what happens is that the tRNA that carries the right codon gets activated. It binds, and then when it actually goes, and then this unbinds, and then then this hydrolyzes into GDP. So this is the spent fuel, and then the thing lengthens into this gets added onto that, and then lengthens. Okay, so I mean that process is well known.
You're going to say about proofreading? Anything? Are you going to say anything? Yes.
You anticipated as well.
Because that's
Leave me alone.
It's not like
There's order. Yes, that too. Where was it? Oh, yes. But I mean, the point about this is that, I mean, again, it looks like it is using energy to self-assemble, right? That looks like. But again, that is a lie. Because actually, the bit that is disassembled, that is, I mean, the place where it actually spends the fuel, it's in this bit. And what is that bit doing? And that is exactly as Nancy said. Actually, that's genetic proofreading. That is largely, the fuel is largely spent in disassembling the wrong thing. So this is what happens. So the codon comes in, the activated codon comes in, but you can have correct and what does D stand for? They always use D. Defective, right? Correct and defective. I want to use W for wrong, but okay, correct and defective. So you can have the correct one bind or the incorrect one bind. It turns out it is diffusion limited, so this constant is the same, but the reverse ones are different. And so at this point they can fall off, or with a very, very much slower rate, you can either it falls off and then links to but yeah, so sorry, or the wrong one can fall off. But I mean the point is this, that is the ratio of the reverse reaction of the correct and the defective one that controls the fraction of mistakes that you make. And it is that ratio. And that ratio is about 10 to the minus 2, which is rubbish. If your proteins are like that, we'll all be dead. Okay, so now the point is, it's long known that what the GTP does is that the activated state, so there's a K2 constant, which is also much faster than this, it activates the GTP and it hydrolyzes it. But at that point, the thing can fall off before it actually go and do some binding. And the point is, both correct one and incorrect activated ones can fall off in the same rate. And so there appears to be a wasteful loop there, where you activate the GTP, you hydrolyze the GTP, and both the correct codon and the incorrect codon fall off into exactly the same ratio. And biologists have known that for years, but it wasn't explained until the 1970s. They're wondering what, so that's called futile cycle. If you look up the word futile cycle, it's very, very interesting non-nuclear physics going on there. But I could have given a talk on futile cycles. I spent my last 3 weeks reading up on it. But so biologists thought there's a futile cycle where you bother to activate the thing with GTP, hydrolyzed GTP, and both the correct activated one and the incorrect activated one can fall off. So it seems wasteful until, of course, Hopfield came along and proved that, in fact, because this thing is one way, it's driven. In fact, the ratio now becomes squared. So I'm going to know this, and I'm not going to prove it to you now. But if you want to read about it, the best pedagogical exposition of that is there's an entire chapter on kinetic proof reading in Uli Alon's system biology book, and it's the clearest exposition of kinetic proof. And he also goes on to show to you how this is important in the immune system. So this loop, where the activation energy, the GTP energy is spent on allowing the disassembly of correct as well as incorrect structure that looks wasteful, was explained by Hopfield in a famous paper. And so this is dissipative self-disassembly. It's dissipative, it's disassembly. So Hopfield wrote a famous paper in PhD this mid-1970s, mechanism kinetic proofreading. And in fact, it turns out to be relevant across the whole for highly accurate discrimination between very similar biomolecules. So the two codons are very, very similar. Again, the immune system is after discrimination between self and non-self, but extremely similar. So there are two ways of doing it. You either redesign equilibrium constants, or you drive it using kinetic proofreading. Okay, as far as I know, this is the only context in the whole of biology in which dissipated self-assembly, the generic logic is clear. In other words, so many biological processes do it because biology has to discriminate between very similar things. You either redesign equilibrium constants, in which case, you have difficulty because the point of the codons is all very similar. So you use the same ribosome, but if you use a very different kind of molecule, you use a different ribosome for each different kind of molecule. So it's tricky. So I think this is the logic is clear. In all the other cases I'm going to show you, the logic isn't clear, although the detailed mechanisms have been worked out. The kind of why question, why does it do it then? Okay, so in fact, back to that review of modern, they go on to say the assembly of complex systems in biology suggests other ways of pressure, including using error correction, allowing energy-consuming reactions to bias the assembly towards the correct structure. So in other words, the logic here is you couple DSD to near equilibrium self-assembly in order to proofread.
Wilson, I'm very confused.
That may be because I'm confused too, or not.
Okay, so this dissolution process that you're talking about, so GDP to GDP, that's also a chemical reaction, right?
Yes.
And I can, just the fact that the arrow is going in one direction doesn't mean that the other arrow doesn't exist. It exists, but it's highly improbable for the back reaction to occur.
Well, I mean, if the reaction is non-equilibrium to the point that it's highly unlikely to go backwards for 100 years, I'm happy. So yes.
Very point of how when you decide it's not equilibrium and not just heavily favored.
Well, I can tell you how it goes. Or this reaction. Just okay, the actual concentrations. The actual concentration. So you know that delta G of the reaction is G. It's correctly tells you no free energy change.
Yeah.
Okay. One way to measure how non-equilibrium the cell is to couple this to drive things. And you think in a real cell. That's the best measure of how much a cell keeps things off equilibrium. And
5.
no, 29. It works out. We are over there. You want to make bloody sure that it doesn't go backwards. That's not surprising. I mean, that's one of the first things I learned when I had time to read it. I discovered it in early July, and there has been bafflingly ever since. So, is there anything to? I mean, I'll give you a wild guess at the end. Okay, I've discovered one coincidence. And if it's a coincidence, it's a very nasty coincidence to distract me. If it's not a coincidence, it's deep. Okay, but I'll tell you. Then calculate the altitude. Unknown in all the texts, but no one has ever asked why the big number. Anyway, so that's how way out it makes absolutely sure. Heat shock response. So I'm not going to take because I'm running out of time. I'm not going to take you through this in detail. But when E. coli gets heat shock, this is what happens. No, okay, I'll take it through. So at 30 degrees, so the key protein is ARPOH. This is some promoter, the protein gets translated, but I mean, the point is the RNA has a loop in it at 30 degrees. Okay, so the translation is very slow because that loop has to melt by KT and it's not going to. So it very slowly gets translated into an active protein called sigma 32. In cases when the gene and the protein are called by different names. I stupidly thought there's sigma 1 to all the way to 31 is the 32nd. Turns out because it's 32 kilodalton molecular weight. Yeah, not as boring as I thought. Right. Okay. So when this thing then go and acts as a promoter, then it translates a whole heteroprotein cassette, which makes a lot of chaperones to refold the bad proteins. Okay, so that's how it works. But at 30 degrees, this is very slow because of this loop. Okay. Furthermore, once this is translated, it gets gobbled up by a protein called DNA K, okay, which sequesters it away. It can't go and trigger all the heat shock proteins. And the point is, this thing is a protease. It chops this thing up. And these, of course, then get used to make this again. Okay, so there's a loop. So all of these steps are dissipated. This is an ATP-dependent protease. There are also proteases that are ATP-independent, which is ATP-dependent, so there's a loop. So 42 degrees, you heat shock the coli. First of all, this melts. And so that's more rapid. And then, you know, that can lead to this whole thing activating. And the point is, this also produces this stuff. So this also produces more of this, and this then is a chaperone. So it grabs all of these proteins and correctly fold. But that competes with this. And so it transiently lowers this destruction rate, right? Because this competes with the proteins. And that is how the cell does it. When it changes the level, it detects that change in level, and then it triggers the whole heat shock response. The details, well, no. The point is, there appears to be a wasteful loop. I mean, anyone care to guess what the half-life of that protein is? In the steady state of E. coli cell not being heat shocked? Just guess.
5, 6
units.
Oh, years.
5 to 6 years.
Yeah. Age of the universe.
Is 1 minute.
Yes, went the other way around. I guess I was not being conservative.
The E. coli is making this and chopping it up using ATP. And of course, making it also uses ATP, but it chops it up using ATP with a 1 minute half-life. I mean, I just thought it must have been designed by a stupid physicist. But I mean, it's
maybe it's like the finite flame on an oven. You can't get one without the other.
Right. So the question is this to do with making the response faster? Well, someone should write the equations down and work it out and compare it to de novo synthesis and all the rest of it. But it happens all over. I mean, I'll give you other examples. But again, no one has asked the question, why does it bother with the dissipative cell disassembly and make this wasteful loop? It's not like kinetic proof reading. It has not been thought through. I think this is low-hanging fruit. I mean, with the collective brain power in this room, I'm not a theorist, but you probably can write all the equations down and solve it before lunch. But there's why does biology? So I've looked for proteins in our bodies that have a lifetime that is equivalent to me. In other words, they are never dissipated, disassembled. All of those are implicated in aging. The proteins that don't go through the loop seem to be bad. Okay, so again, here's a dissipative disassembly step. That protease is ATP dependent. I discovered that there's such proteases about 5, 6 years ago when I started thinking about this problem. And it turns out that the biologists have thought about it too. So this is a review on energy-dependent proteases in the target. It's a very good review because there's a section at the beginning that asks why before it goes into gene names and this guy, actually it's not a guy, it's a guy and a girl. So they asked, the authors asked, why is it that biology have ATP-dependent proteases and why it is so often involved in these apparently futile loops that makes the protein trap linear, use energy to chop it back up again and make it again. And in fact, they said there are functions. So it says apparently dissipated proteolysis may be a drastic solution to the problem in activating a protein since rescue activity requires synthesis to complete protein. So they see the problem. And then actually, unlike almost all the other papers on ATP-dependent proteases, is that actually biology is not given. It has 4 billion years to destupefy itself. It's called evolution. So there must be reasons. And they gave about 5 reasons. All of them are qualitative. Each one of them can be at least one biophysics PhD to work out whether this is in fact a generic reason for doing it. So the function. So, first, what I have to say is that dissipative self-assembly is actually inside cells. So, in other words, you either couple it to dissipative self-assembly, or in fact, you couple it some of the time to equilibrium self-assembly. But either way, these kind of loops in biology are absolutely vital. And as far as I can see, attention from physicists have only ever focused on this bit. Self-assembly bit. Very few people, if you know of some, tell me, attention on this bit. What is it doing there? What? Okay, so the question is there, you define this bit and how it couples back to self-assembly. Because if you actually work out how much heat is dissipated there, how much energy the cell needs, is considerable. So almost no one is focused on, even the biologists have not thought through the energetics. So the Royal Society recently ran a discussion meeting called Energetics and Genomics, and they're beginning to think about it. Okay, so that's molecules, because that's the word we're familiar with. Let me now move up the scale to cells, tissues, and organs. So here's the frog. Here's the leg of a frog. Here's the front of the leg of a frog. Here's the front corresponding digits of a human. But of course, at one stage in my mother's body, in my mother's womb, I did have webs. This is a vertebrate limb in utero. So at some point, the web disappeared. The web disappeared because of a process called programmed cell death. So at some point, those web cells committed suicide. Okay, so this is called programmed cell death, PCD. And if that process goes wrong, you end up with people being born with webs between their digits. This is crucial to embryogenesis. If you're healthy and you're certainly an adult, if you're healthy, then about 10 to 11 cells in your body will have committed suicide. If the events have not happened, you'll be in Edinburgh hospital now. It's serious. And in fact, cancer are cells that often cells. So I mean, you've all seen things of this kind, but you know, these are 2 cells committing suicide in a very particular way. They start blebbing out vesicles like that. So when the people who discovered this, I'll show you the next slide, showed it to a Greek professor. He said that looks like petals falling off a flower. And so, I mean, death is a Scottish thing. We're all obsessed with it. It's not what I'm going to do. So it's a very Calvinistic thing to do. But anyway, so this is British. I can't even spell cancer. Why do I spell cancer that way? Anyway, but this is significant in the British Journal of Cancer in 72, and there's a beautiful hand drawing. So, oh, by the way, there's a footnote that tells you the Greek professor said this looks like petals falling off a flower, so it's apoptosis. In other words, from and falling off from. But it explains to you the word is not apoptosis, but apoptosis, because PT is a phoneme in Greek, that is a silent T. So please don't say apoptosis, there's nothing popping, it's apoptosis. It's like pterodactyl, that sort of half bird, half rat, I think is PT, the Greek word for net for wings. Right, okay. This is the only science paper that I know that has the etymology as a footnote on page 1 and the pronunciation guide. You were looking at the paper, just the footnote 1. Anyway, so the beautiful hand-drawn drawing. The reason why it took so long to discover is that when a cell undergoes suicide by this means of petals falling off the flower, the debris that it makes are non-inflammatory. And therefore they're perfectly absorbed by all of the other cells. It leaves no scar. So if you cut the web from a pool of frog, after it heals, there will be a scar. Because that's death by murder. It's not involved with doers. So the debris from cell murder are toxic. But apoptosis, the debris are not toxic. They're absorbed by all the other cells. So, there are other ways of cell death, murder, and all the rest of it, bad ways of doing it, called necrosis. But anyway, so the product is perfectly absorbed by the neighbors. So that tells you immediately that this way of dying has evolved, is selected because, is adaptive because it doesn't cause inflammation. I mean, if the 10 to the 10, a topic event in the liver all leaves scars, you have a very scarred liver after one day. So it's been selected to do that. And by the way, I don't know how many simulations I've seen in this workshop already, in this program. So far, people said, oh, they're just some cell death. Well, yes, but it's not just some cell death. This is evolved to do this. The thing that it actually produces is absorbed by all the other cells and it functions as nutrient. It doesn't just die and leave a hole. For example, we may stimulate growth in all of the cells and things like that. And I think you'll find that is absolutely crucial. It cannot be neglected.
But to start somewhere, right? With these models.
Yes, I'm telling you where to go next. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the starting point, but I think the effect is of the essence. And the point about apoptosis is not just the neck room. There's a biochemical effect that needs to be modeled. Right. Well, not advancing. Oh, yes, it is advancing. So, in fact, the thing that I didn't know, and I could read about it, is that in fact, cells has to be energetically very healthy to commit suicide. When the cell's lacking in ATP, it can't do it. Okay, so this is a great paper, bioenergetics and cell death. I like the way they put it. Cells need energy not only to support their vital functions, but also to digress. Not my words. Occasionally, when they talk about these things, they go into a non-biological language. Execution of a apoptosis program includes energy-dependent steps. And it's hardly surprising because in eukaryotes, apoptosis is initiated in the mitochondria, which of course is an energy factory of the cell. So it's hardly surprising, actually, that this is an energy-intensive process. If you're too knackered, you cannot commit suicide on a cellular level. So again, apoptosis is dissipative cell disassembly. Certainly dissipative, certainly cell, certainly disassembly.
So, for example, if you starve cancer cells,
The trouble about starving cancer cells, you also starve meat to fight cancer cells. So there's a problem. But yes, I mean, that's what is known as a physics solution. But yes, I mean, it will work. Freezing it in liquid nitrogen also works. It has similar effect to starving.
Yeah.
On meat.
Okay.
Right, so that's dissipative murder. Anyway, so you may recognize the last author of this paper. I'm going to give you an incoherent explanation of this because I mentioned it to you, so I can't be here, but I've done some work on this. Just to show me this and give an explanation, I may get it all wrong. But let me tell you what I think Rita has done. She worked with a whole bunch of genomics people, and what they looked at is they took all the genes in the known in single cell eukaryotes, in metazoans, the lowest order of multicellular animals and vertebrates. Okay, so those are genes and gene interaction that is involved in apoptosis. Those are genes involved in detecting that DNA replication has gone wrong, genome stability. And what you can see is that as you move up the evolutionary tree from apoptosis to metazoans to vertebrates, is the interface that gets densely populated. It's how those talk to each other that matters. And what they discover, I mean, their main message is that you need to persuade cells where DNA repair stuff has gone wrong to commit suicide before they become cancerous. So apoptosis also is important for making sure that cells that ought not be there actually, die before they are pushed. So you push them to die gracefully, not inflammatory, before they become cancerous. So I think this is actually incredibly exciting. I'm going to talking to Rita again next week about this. Okay, so that's in multicellulars. So in 1995, this guy, Jean-Claude Emerson, threw the spanner into the works, or cat among the pigeons among biologists, when he discovered that single-cell organisms can also commit suicide. And of course, all the evolutionary biologists went wild, because how can a suicidal trait be selected? He discovered in eukaryotes those kinds of cells, and now since 2007, it's also an recent paper. So single-cell apoptosis started as a French affair. So they now discovered it also happened in bacteria, which is hardly surprising, because I already told you that apoptosis in these cells initiated in the mitochondrion. Mitochondrion, of course, started life as a bacteria. So, you know, it's not overly surprising that bacteria do it too. So the real question is, how can suicide be a selected trait? Now, there's a vast literature on this. The debate is ongoing. But let me give you the paper. In fact, it was this paper that started my interest in death. So he's an American naturalist, Pierre Durand, is now written an interesting book on the whole thing. So what I did was they took some Chlamydomonas branhardii. So Chlamydomonas, as they used beyond studying motility, they just in some time media grew them up. Half of them they persuaded to commit suicide. There are well-known ways of tickling a cell and say, go on, kill yourself. The other half, they murdered. I think they did this on occasion. And now, each one ended up with a soup, with a death soup. We used the death soup to grow other cells. It turns out that that soup grew better than in your defined medium. That soup, they grew worse. Now I'm going to show you a diagram that you guys, because you're theorists, draw quite often. But it turns out there's also a drawing of a plant cell, where that is the chloroplast. It turns out the chloroplast is not part of the cell. The cell carefully does a branch up to avoid it. And the reason for that is very dangerous. This is halfway through eating it up. But because this deals in oxygen, it's surrounded by reacting oxygen-free radicals. You've got to handle it with a kit glass. The plant cell clearly wants it, but it wants it just not too close.
Wait, so I knew it has an extra membrane because it's like an old bacteria.
It's not extramembrane. It's
It's actually connected like that?
disconnected. I can show you that from microgram. This shows you very, very clearly. It's not like the mitochondria. The mitochondrial process is complete. The original bacterium was eaten by that other cell, but in the chloroplast case, it said, no, slide by Britain, not related to Europe.
It's very oxidant. Exactly.
So you've got to be careful. So that's why they didn't say that, but my instinct is that the reason why you would just murder a plant cell and release a chloroplast is very bad. But when plant cells commit suicide, they have evolved to pick it apart first. They know this thing is dangerous. Let's use some energy to take it apart safely before I release it. I think that's part of it. They didn't say that, but that's my guess. I mean, this is cute, right? This is the only time I ever drawn a complex variable.
I'll use it for my next.
No,
mathematical physics.
No, this is great.
lecture thing.
This is interesting research.
Yeah.
Topologically, though, it's.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't help.
But anyway, so maybe this is part of starvation response. You want to commit suicide when there's low nutrients so that you can keep the others alive and all the rest of it. I'll have another 2 minutes. Let me just do another 2 minutes. Okay, so programmed cell death is dissipative unicellular or. So again, people now realize that they're important in biofilms because, for example, some cells in the biofilm commit suicide to release the DNA, and that DNA functions as an adhesive polymer to glue things together. Now, I don't know, because I haven't read the literature in detail, whether this is guessing already knows, but at least it's possible. And people who are now engineering biofilms are also learning how to program the cells in the biofilm to die to make biofilms of particular structures as well, and engineering biology. But let me tell you, so this is slightly interesting. The group E. coli, it's a lag phase, an exponential phase, there's a stationary phase, there's a death phase. But it turns out if you're patient enough, you carry on looking at the death phase, it does this. Look at that number. It's not 60 seconds, it's not 60 days, it's not 60 weeks, it's 60 months. I mean, they did this experiment for 5 years. I mean, it couldn't have been a British PhD, that's exactly what I was going to say. And the point is, they are not the same cells, because these are from here on, there's a new mutant called a GASP mutant, that's best named biology mutant. It's called growth advantage in stationary phase. So occasionally, these acronyms are good, just occasionally. But the point is, if you compete these mutants, they start coming here, if you compete these against the wild type, they overgrow. They grow better than the original defined. So what is going on here? They're going through this cycle. And not the same cell just sitting there happily or unhappily. They're dying, regrowing. The only way you can get mutants is by regrowing and having to duplicate the genome and make mistakes, right? So it's actually going through the cycles all the way through for 5 years, which is longer than I might have guessed. And it turns out that, so my colleague, Martin Kane in Durham, I gave this talk a few years ago, he didn't believe that any of this could be new. So we went to do some experiments, turns out I was right, this was new, no one noticed. You take E. coli, you delete one gene, just the one gene. He was lucky. He deleted one gene. He wasn't lucky, he was systematic. He deleted one gene, then this can't happen. It turns out you just delete one gene from E. coli. When those cells die, the others cannot cannibalize the products. Just one gene. I'm married to a tax accountant. This is inheritance tax planning. They thought about it. They thought about how to do dissipative cell disassembly. The gene also has a pre-mortem function, but it has a post-mortem function. So I don't know what the next thing is. So I mean, look. Let me stick my neck right out. You didn't see that last phrase. I mean, what kind of state is that? And it's going on for 5 years, right? The only thing it's got is distilled water and oxygen. I mean, as a physicist, you know that thing has to end. I mean, nothing can go on forever. But I mean, what kind of state is that? I'm looping that. But I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't even understand any of those words. You do. What kind of state is that? 5 years. Think about it. Anyway, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. I move from organisms to ecosystems. Let's go up the scale. Nutrient cycle. But what is a nutrient cycle? This is recycling what plant ecologists, what forest litter, we learned this phrase recently too. And the point is, it's full of microorganisms here. They get very warm doing this. It's why there's never any snow in their tree, not just because they're falling, because the snow melts. So this is, if you consider if your box is the ecosystem, that is the biological system doing dissipative cell disassembly. Okay? The box is not the tree or the fungus, the tree and fungus together, as told evolved, who use energy to disassemble the dead bits. Okay? There's a loop. So in fact, forest ecologists have been working on litter for a long time, this isn't the rest of us. What they say is that the decomposability of a species consistently correlated with species ecological strategy. In other words, please tune their litter, the leaf composition, to make it digestible by the organisms so that they're doing recycling. It's not an accident. We've seen how they talk about cells dying gracefully. This is when biology goes way out because it talks about the afterlife legacy. So when biologists start using words like afterlife, you know there's something going on. It's not an average word. Usually you get rejected when you use words like that in your papers. They've got to wait. Right. So what happens to goes on? Let me tell you the most frightening experiment failed dissipated disassembly, and where now the system is the entire globe. It's been done once. So the coal deposits in the Carboniferous, Latin, coal forming, about 360 million years ago, wood evolved. Lignin, not just average cellulose cell walls, but lignin. So evolution invented wood. The only thing on earth that can digest wood, on what is known as white fungus, all the other fungus it's collected, they're called white fungus. I know some of them are not white, but anyway. So, so the only thing that can digest wood is them. But they came a little late. So in fact, it turns out that when wood first evolved, there were no mushrooms in the world. Bit of an oversight on evolution's part. So wood accumulates, especially during uptime conditions, very slowly. And what happens? Wood sequesters carbon dioxide, right? So it very nearly led to global snowball stage. It's known as a Carboniferous extinction. The mushrooms got the message just in time. So that was when the ecosystem left, anticipated self-assembly did not happen. So we could not couple back. Experiment has been done. We're now busy, of course, learning more, they're putting it back quickly, but that's another matter. So, you know, when you don't get DST bit right, bad things happen. So the message is DST has 4 length scales. I've talked about molecules, you may not want to talk about molecules dying, this is a kind of death, but all the way to cells, tissues, to organisms, to ecosystems. Biology does not let things just fall apart. Okay? Biology expends energy to take them apart. Now you might think that's obvious, but it isn't. I mean, here's a biology paper. Okay, here's a biology paper published fairly recently in 2007 to trace the dynamics of gene transcripts of They have to look at the death of zebrafish and mice, or maybe rats, and look at how genes are expressed after death. And it includes this sentence: after death, organisms undergoes a thermodynamic different process of spontaneous disintegration. In other words, these are card-carrying biologists. Well-sorted card-carrying biologists. They think at death is about a second law kicking over. In other words, their picture of death is like that. Just something just falling apart. What Jorah isn't. Biological death is not like that. It has evolved to use energy to take it apart in order to feed it back. So last 2 slides, sorry. So how far does this go? I mean, all evidence now points to the fact that Luca, the last universal common ancestor, already has programmed cell death in it. Does it go further? Well, I generally don't like journals labeling their own paper a very important paper. And should be apparently does this. But in this case, I agree. There should be a reader vote at least. There's a thing called a citation index that does this for you. Anyway, so Cyprian Otto did this experiment. He's a real chemist. I mean, it's very good because his papers draw pictures that are just for physicists. I mean, he also had chemist pictures where he gives you the entire structure of this molecule, which is scarce every physicist. But he also, you know, so he makes some kind of monomer that can self-assemble in the higher order polymers. And he wanted to do Darwinian evolution in a test tube, much like RNA works of experiment. But he encounters the same catastrophe. The short ones always replicate quicker than the long ones. So the only thing he gets at the end of his evolution experiments, however he selects, are dimers and trimers. It's very boring. The RNA people knew this ages ago. Until he actually finds a molecule to disassemble, an energetic molecule to disassemble the dimers and trimers differentially. Then it works. Then he can do evolution experiment in this test tube. So in other words, you actually need to couple dissipative self-disassembly into, in his case, also dissipative self-assembly. But until he couples the DSD in, his evolution experiment in the test tube utterly failed. I mean, not just a little bit failed, it utterly failed. Dimers and trimers will never get you to life. Okay, so I mean, you remember their sentence from that review of modern physics review, right? I mean, you need to couple the thing back in. So my instinct is that this dissipative self-assembly was needed in the prebiotic soup. You don't get started with just self-assembly. No. You got to get life. You have to think through how the evolution, the first step of evolution, is how to couple the disassembly back to self-assembly and not at equilibrium, not just one of those equilibrium reactions. So, last one. So, January the 5th this year, I was sitting in bed, turned on my iPhone, it was dead. It's not just because it wasn't charged. I took it to the Apple shop and they grew. Your phone is dead. You've got to buy a new one, new phone. Okay, so my phone is dead. You look up the OED, that use the word dead occurs very late. It's that kind of death. I mean, that's fake death. Death in quotation marks. That's real death. For those of you who are in Britain who are old enough, the joke is I'm single-handedly running the campaign for real death. You get it, right? This campaign for real aid. Anyway, I mean, what's the difference? The difference is that is designed by stupid humans. And that's designed by evolution in the biosphere. Evolution never got started without building the backward step in. We thought we could. So if you want to build a circulating economy, and I'm writing the third paragraph, my ground application. on the build of circular economy, you need to learn how to couple either dissipative or equilibrium self-assembly back to dissipative self-assembly. We need to learn to do that from scratch. But we can look at biology. So, I mean, I think the challenge to us is that we need to come up with non-equilibrium physics of dissipative self-assembly. That's what I have to say. You're in charge.
Chair is in charge.
Oh, yeah, any further questions?
So, I mean, okay, I've got a question. For example, there are these chemical reactions when there are feedback loops.
Yes.
And, you know, people use Hill functions and all kinds of things to put in the fact that, you know, maybe there's a degradation, maybe there's a thing that is positive or negative feedback loop or whatever. And so adding those in the sort of equations at the level of equations is not hard. I mean,
I understand that. That's
anybody in this room.
Everything that I said is not new.
No.
Putting it all together in a new perspective is perhaps new.
The question I guess I have is, if you are a theorist or somebody who's embarking on this, let's say, I'm fascinated by your stuff. What is the thing that I would add?
What's the function? So like Hopfield says that wasteful loop is because that's one of the ways of not doing equilibrium constants, but still be very discriminatory. He explained why it does it that way. That loop, if you read the biological literature, that wasteful loop has baffled biologists for a long time. He explained why. In the E. coli heat shock case, I want to know, or in much more general, why the organisms keep turning over the protein. People written the equation down the protein turn over.
Yeah, I mean, you will write these equations. There are parameters you fiddle around with it, you'll get something.
But I once ran a project with Thomas Krish called Why? Asking why biologists never ask the why question. They worked out all the mechanisms, even physicists jumped in, write out all the equations, solve 1,000 couple of equations, but why does it do it that way? What's the point?
Could there be a relation between having to be not that far off in your rate constant, some stability with this? Because let's say you take your iPhone again, yes, it is extremely stable thermodynamically, so your DSD is going to have a hell of a time
Yes.
with ATP, and so maybe biology has to be close to this, else it will not work. I mean, there's some sort of trade-off there, right? I'm thinking of your classic recycling bag starting, compost recycling bag starting to recycle while it's actually still being filled, right? Maybe it's something like that.
I think that's the biggest narrative. Then you can come down and commit it. My instinct is that eventually, when we put our minds to it, there will come to be about 5 or 6 generic reasons. So this is mechanical type reasons, generic reasons why couplings dissipated self-assembly, tuning exactly the right amount of energy to use, because that's the problem of our circular economy. We can recycle, we use horrendous amount of energy. Right, so biologists evolved a couple in exactly the right amount of energy to recycle. I think we'll discover if we put our minds to it. Like Hopkins saying there's one generic reason why that's the right thing to do. Hopkins didn't work on energetics. He didn't ask how do you optimize, how much energy is worth spending doing that. But anyway, that's one. I think the heat shock thing would tell you that coupling it this way speeds up the accessibility or give you a more responsive system. But that remains to be proven. I suspect that what we could add to it is by working on individual cases, asking why, and looked at it after 5 years and say, now look, in fact, there are only about 3 reasons why you want to do this. And those 3 could inspire this, actually. But not until you work on individual cases. And that's exactly what happened with self-assembly. There's nothing new in self-assembly until criticism get hold of it and they discover the general principles. Right? No one asked me why I don't stand to the 9.
It's Friday.
So I mean, I could say because it's going to be 20 KT.
Well, why is it 20 KT? Because so let me tell you the facts. 20 KT is about 6,000 kelvins. That's the temperature of the sun. All non-equilibrium processes on the Earth, the life thing started with either hydrothermal vents or being driven by the sun. So the question is this deep biochemical memory of how the driving started? It's a good accident. It happens that is driven to the point, exactly the point, when T hot is surface temperature of the sun, it's the back body temperature of the sun. I'm telling you the facts. It could be a pure accident, in which case, hard luck. It's very nice for 3 days and then it's gone. Maybe biochemistry or some memory, just like ionic concentration, 0.15 mole. That's because it's ionic concentration of the sea. We each a drop of seawater. So does it preserve something about it? Right. It's all the prebiotic reaction in the sense of the earth.
You may translate it to typical photon energy.
Yes, yes. I mean, that's how, if you look at the climate model, people do these entropy values for the sun and Uranus with them, the driving is from a 6,000 K, 20 KT RT source. And the ATP locally, the hot spot when ATP is hybridized, that local temperature is momentarily the temperature of the sun. Don't have to understand.
20 KT is the bending energy of the liquid membrane. The membrane is variable, right?
There are all kinds of reasons why downstream it may well
Well,
be.
one thing is clearly, you just being roughly 10 times KT means that you basically there's a barrier so that, thermal vibrations don't kill you. So, so that's already just a simple reason why, and you probably don't want to be making 200.
Yeah, but it's working the 17, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. But I don't think this is, I don't think the difference between 17 and 20 here. This is 18.
This is probably order with
It's quite.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, that's point
Yeah,
in the physics way that needs explaining.
yeah.
Is there something about driving this thing that cannot be detected? Is there something about life that is detected quite a lot? People think this, they put 50 kilojoules per mole, is even worse.
So before this becomes Douglas Adams,
As long as I can be Douglas Adams, I'm happy.